That day, my father gave me a choice that felt like the edge of a cliff staring back at me. "Hand over full access to your bank account or leave this house," he said, his voice calm but loaded with the kind of finality that leaves no room for negotiation, no space for disagreement, no possibility of an argument that could sway him. I paused, heart thudding in my chest, and for a moment, the world felt unsteady beneath my feet. I realized then that this wasn't about money. It had never been about money. It was about control. It was about the way every word, every glance, every expectation had been shaped to mold me into someone who existed only to serve them, to quietly give, to quietly obey, to quietly disappear if I refused. I chose both because walking away didn't mean leaving my life behind. It meant reclaiming it, at least in part, and keeping some dignity intact. I packed my few belongings, the small collection of things that felt like mine alone, and stepped outside into the pale, gray light of a Sunday afternoon. The air was cool, damp with the scent of rain-soaked earth, the clouds hanging low over Oregon, pressing down on the rooftops with a familiar heaviness that had always mirrored the atmosphere inside the house. Closing the door behind me, I could still hear Lel's voice echoing in my ears, low, commanding, unwavering. It wasn't anger exactly, it was expectation. It was authority wrapped in the illusion of care, the kind of voice that convinces you obedience is love and compliance is kindness. The living room was emptying in my memory. Thora with her gentle, persuasive smile, the one that convinced strangers she was the glue holding everything together. Joran, oblivious or perhaps indifferent, glued to his phone, a teenager trapped in the skin of a grown man. And Lel, the orchestrator, speaking with the precision of a conductor, expecting every note to fall perfectly into place. And me, I had been invisible in plain sight. I had carried the weight of bills, groceries, utilities, insurance, maintaining the house while they spent freely on energy drinks, video games, and whims they didn't earn the right to. Their words, casual but cutting, "You should know your place. You don't have your own family, so help this one. Your paycheck will go to me first," had drilled themselves into my mind for years, shaping my perception of duty and love, blurring the lines between care and exploitation. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the carpet, worn thin by years of footsteps and unspoken arguments, wondering how many conversations had been shouted over it, how many apologies never spoken, how many moments of pain dismissed as trivial. The rain tapped gently against the window pane, a sound that usually brought calm, but today it counted down each second of a confrontation I had been avoiding in my own mind. Memories of my youth flooded back, sharp and accusing. At 19, after my mother left, Lel had told me, in that same low, firm voice, that I was the woman of the house now, and must bear strength beyond my years. At 20, wanting to pay for my own cell phone, he said it was cute, a patronizing smile disguising an expectation that I should remain subordinate. At 25, when I tried to move out, Thora's tears and Joran's warnings chained me to the home I had painstakingly supported, as if leaving would be betrayal rather than liberation. And now, at 31, after over a decade of relentless giving, I was still not free. I walked to my small desk in the corner, opening the drawer where I kept every receipt, bill, and bank statement, not for them, but for myself, a testament to a life of quiet sacrifice and unacknowledged labor. Every line on those papers screamed the same truth. I had sustained a household that never truly saw me. The phrase from earlier that day repeated in my mind like a broken record. "You put all your salary into the family account." Their words weren't just about money. They were about erasing me, reducing me to nothing more than a silent provider, a ghost who existed only as long as she gave. But in that moment, something within me shifted. A quiet, steady, unmovable force rose from the pit of my chest, like the tide slowly turning beneath the shore, reclaiming space that had long been denied. For the first time, I realized that leaving wasn't just an act of defiance. It was the beginning of reclaiming myself, my identity, my worth, and my freedom. As I stood there in my small room, the gray light of the late afternoon seeping through the window blinds, I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and clarity. It was as if a fog that had hovered over my life for years had finally lifted, revealing the intricate web of manipulation that had ensnared me since my earliest memories of adulthood. I sank into the chair by my desk, running my fingers over the stack of manila folders containing receipts, bank statements, loan documents, and every piece of evidence I had painstakingly gathered over the years. Each document was a silent witness to the countless hours I had spent working, paying bills, supporting a household that never truly acknowledged my sacrifices. The reality of what had been happening was heavy, almost suffocating. They didn't just take my money, they took my name, my agency, my right to exist on my own terms. I remember the first time they had used my name to get a loan for Joran, telling me it was just a temporary favor. I had trusted them, believing that family was supposed to support each other, that loyalty meant bending when asked. Instead, I had become a tool, a mechanism for their convenience, my consent assumed and my boundaries ignored. The memory of that first betrayal was sharp in my mind. The DMV letter arriving months later, my name absent from the vehicle title, the casual dismissal from Lel. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. Family handles things internally. It had been the first crack in my perception of love and duty, the moment I realized that obedience was not appreciated but expected, and that my value was measured solely by what I provided. And yet, 4 years, I continued to give, hoping that enough contribution, enough quiet labor, would earn me recognition, respect, maybe even freedom. I had believed in the illusion of fairness, in the fantasy that sacrifice would be reciprocated. But now, sitting alone in the room I had claimed as my own, I could see the truth with brutal clarity. It never had been about fairness. It was about control. Every request, every helpful suggestion, every gentle nudge from Thora and firm insistence from Lel had been a strategy, a calculated move to ensure I remained tethered, obedient, and silent. I remembered the nights spent lying awake, listening to the rain patter against the window, replaying conversations in my head, dissecting every phrase, every subtle command, every smile that disguised expectation as affection. It was exhausting, mentally and emotionally, and yet I had endured because I wanted to believe that family meant trust, that love meant compromise. But endurance had its limits, and the limit had been reached. I picked up my phone and opened the Notes app, creating a new file titled Things They Said. I began documenting every insult, every command, every expectation that had been placed upon me over the years, not just from the past few hours but stretching back to when I had first stepped into adulthood. The words poured out, a river of memory and emotion, a testimony to years of silent suffering. You should know your place. Your paycheck will go to me first. If you need money, you ask me. You don't have your own family, so help this one. Each sentence burned on the screen, crystallizing the abuse, the manipulation, the subtle erasure of my existence. It was not revenge yet. It was clarity, awareness, the first step toward reclaiming my life. I realized that understanding the extent of their control was empowering. Recognition of a problem is always the first step toward solving it, and now I had a roadmap. I could see clearly how they had infiltrated every corner of my life, how carefully and methodically they had conditioned me to accept what should have been unacceptable. And with that clarity came determination. I would not be their pawn any longer. I would not be erased, silenced, or exploited. The room felt colder, sharper somehow, as if the walls themselves had been waiting for this moment, the moment I stopped being invisible. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the gray sky outside, the steady rhythm of rain now a metronome for my thoughts. I thought about every time I had bent, every time I had sacrificed, every time I had convinced myself that giving more might earn me respect. None of it had mattered. But now, for the first time, I felt a subtle but unshakable sense of control, not the control they had always demanded, but my own personal sovereignty. I could plan, I could strategize, I could reclaim what was mine. I wasn't powerless. The first step had been taken, documentation. And from here, the next steps would follow, precise, deliberate, and unstoppable. For years, I had let them dictate the narrative, decide what was true and what wasn't, but now I held the facts. I had proof, a tangible record of every manipulation, every act of financial abuse, every attempt to erase me. And with it, I felt the first flicker of something long buried, hope, determination, and yes, the quiet, simmering ember of revenge, not born of anger but of the undeniable right to exist, to be seen, to reclaim what had always been mine. The next morning, the world outside my window seemed unchanged, gray and calm, almost mocking in its serenity, while inside me, a storm had quietly taken shape. I sat at my desk, the folders of evidence open before me, their contents sprawled like pieces of a puzzle I had spent years unknowingly trying to solve. I could almost hear their voices echoing behind the walls, Lel's low, authoritative tone, Joran's lazy, indifferent smirks, and Thora's soft, persuasive reassurances that always came with an expectation attached. Each one had a place in the intricate system of control they had created, a system I had been complicit in maintaining without even realizing it. My mind went back to 2019, the year when the first real crack appeared in our family's facade. I had just received a promotion at the clinic, a modest one, but significant for me. I remember the pride swelling in my chest, the feeling of finally being recognized for my work, for my competence, for my ability to stand on my own. I carried that pride into the kitchen, where Lel waited with a tone that was unusually gentle, almost conspiratorial. "Your brother needs a vehicle," he said, words seemingly casual but weighted with expectation. "His credit isn't ready yet, so we'll need your help." I looked at Joran, who leaned against the counter, arms crossed, with that familiar air of entitlement I had been silently managing for years. Thora, ever the peacemaker, poured coffee, her smile seemingly warm, but it was a smile I had learned to read through, the kind that masks demand with kindness. They painted the situation as temporary, as helping family, and for a moment, I almost believed them. I signed the auto loan, trusting that they would honor their word. I didn't realize at the time that this was not an act of help but a calculated move to entangle me further, to bind my financial identity to their whims, making it nearly impossible for me to claim autonomy. Within months, the payments began skipping, and what followed was a series of excuses, manipulations, and outright lies. Thora insisted that Joran had already set it up. Lel told me it was temporary, and Joran casually transferred the title to his girlfriend, leaving me blindsided by the realization that I had been duped. I remember staring at the DMV letter, my name absent from the title, a hollow feeling settling in my chest. Their dismissive remarks, "Family handles things internally," cut deeper than any confrontation ever could. That day, the seed of awareness was planted, the first recognition that I had been supporting a household that never valued my autonomy. And yet, for years afterward, I continued to pay, to give, to hope that my efforts might earn me recognition, respect, or at least some semblance of fairness. But the truth is, they never intended to acknowledge it. In 2020, during the pandemic, another layer of manipulation unfolded. The house needed repairs, roof leaks, plumbing issues, foundation cracks, and once again, I was expected to foot the bill. Nearly $12,000 went from my account to contractors, permits, materials, with no acknowledgement, no gratitude, only subtle insinuations that I was investing in my future. 2 seasons passed, my efforts unnoticed, my name absent from the updated deed, leaving me to realize that my contributions were measured only in service to them, never in ownership or respect. And now in 2023, I found myself staring at another unauthorized transaction, $200 moved to Joran's account, facilitated by the very access they demanded from me. My mind raced, piecing together the years of silent exploitation, the years of coerced obedience, the constant erasure of my presence. I realized that this was not just financial abuse, it was a systematic dismantling of my identity, a meticulous effort to render me invisible while consuming everything I had to offer. And in that moment, a quiet rage began to build, not the kind fueled by immediate anger, but a deep, simmering determination born from years of recognition and understanding. I would no longer be complicit. I would no longer be invisible. I would no longer allow them to define my value or my worth. Every document, every bank statement, every manipulated transaction became a weapon, a tool for reclaiming my autonomy, a shield against the years of erasure. I began to organize, meticulously, methodically, creating backups, documenting everything, emailing trusted allies, ensuring that the truth could no longer be hidden behind their narratives. For the first time, I felt a sense of power, not born of malice but of undeniable justice, the right to exist on my own terms, the right to reclaim what had always been mine, and the determination to confront the illusions they had spun around me for far too long. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant rooftops, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and deep violet, I found myself wandering through the quiet streets near my apartment, my mind racing with every detail of the past few years. The cool breeze carried the faint scent of rain on asphalt, mingling with the aroma of street food vendors packing up after another long day. There was a strange calm in the environment, contrasting sharply with the storm of thoughts raging in my head. I thought about the countless small gestures they had used to manipulate me, the casual remarks that always carried hidden expectations, and the moments where their kindness was merely a strategy to secure compliance. I remembered the time Thora had called me late at night, feigning worry about Joran, asking me to transfer money quickly just for tonight, and how I, exhausted from my own responsibilities, had complied without hesitation. It wasn't generosity, it was leverage. And with each memory, the layers of denial I had wrapped around myself for years began to unravel. I realized how carefully and methodically they had orchestrated my compliance, how subtle their tactics were, and how easily I had been convinced that my own sacrifices were acts of love rather than exploitation. I walked past the familiar coffee shop where I had spent hours working on personal projects, and I thought about the nights I had stayed up late, poring over spreadsheets, making careful calculations, and planning my own financial future, all while their expectations silently loomed over me like a dark cloud. The irony was painful. I had been diligent, disciplined, and responsible, yet every achievement was quietly siphoned away, reappropriated, and presented back to me as something I had helped them with. I felt a wave of frustration, the kind that comes from realizing that you have been giving your best, believing in fairness, only to discover that fairness was never part of the equation. And yet, amid the frustration, a spark of clarity emerged. I could see the patterns, the predictability of their behavior, the unmistakable sequence of manipulation, and I understood for the first time that knowledge was power. Each document I had compiled, each note I had written, every recorded interaction became a tool for empowerment rather than a source of anxiety. I began to formulate a strategy, meticulously, thinking through every possible move, anticipating their reactions, and planning for contingencies. For the first time in years, I felt the exhilarating sense of control, the kind that comes not from revenge, but from reclaiming one's autonomy and dignity. I thought about confronting them, not with anger or shouting, but with precision, showing them the undeniable evidence of their manipulation, ensuring that my voice was heard, my presence recognized, and my contributions acknowledged. It was not just about money, it was about identity, about respect, about reclaiming the narrative of my life that had been quietly rewritten by others. As the evening deepened into night, I returned to my apartment, my steps deliberate and steady. I sat at my desk, lit a small lamp, and began outlining the sequence of events, carefully connecting each act of manipulation, each financial intrusion, and each subtle coercion. The pages slowly filled with words, evidence, and reflections, a tapestry of truth that I had long been too weary or too afraid to assemble. In that quiet solitude, I felt a sense of determination unlike anything I had known before. I would no longer be erased. I would no longer bend to their convenience. I would no longer allow the subtle poison of manipulation to dictate the terms of my existence. The room was silent except for the scratching of my pen and the soft hum of the streetlights outside, yet within me, a new clarity took root, one that was steady, deliberate, and unshakable. And as I looked at the notes, the documents, and the careful record I had compiled, I knew that the next steps would require courage, strategy, and patience, but they would be mine to control. The awareness of their patterns, the collection of undeniable evidence, and the meticulous documentation of their exploitation formed the foundation of a plan that could not be ignored, a plan that would allow me to reclaim not just what was taken, but my right to exist on my own terms. And with that realization, a quiet, steadfast resolve settled within me, a resolve that would not waver, that would not falter, and that would ultimately lead me to the justice, recognition, and freedom that I had long been denied. The next morning, I awoke to the soft hum of the city outside my window, filtered through the faint glow of dawn. There was a peculiar quiet, almost as if the world had shifted subtly in anticipation of the choices I was about to make. My body felt tense, alert, yet strangely energized, like the calm before a storm. I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the early commuters move with purpose, oblivious to the intricate drama unfolding within my life. My mind wandered back to the moments that had shaped me, years of loyalty, of patience, of silent endurance. Each act of compliance, each small concession, each forced smile at the family dinner, or casual nod to their suggestions, had seemed like trivial obligations at the time. Yet, in hindsight, they were threads woven into a larger tapestry of control, each one tightening around my autonomy. I recalled the nights spent double-checking bank statements, cross-referencing emails, and meticulously recording conversations, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the creeping frustration of realizing just how systematically my trust had been exploited. These recollections, though heavy, now served a different purpose. Instead of pulling me into despair, they sharpened my focus, fueling the strategy that had begun to form in my mind. I knew I had to act carefully, methodically, to ensure that every step I took would lead toward liberation rather than conflict. I opened my laptop and began organizing my notes into a comprehensive timeline, detailing every financial discrepancy, every subtle manipulation, every coerced act of compliance. Each entry was precise, backed by documents, emails, and photographs, evidence that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. As I worked, the emotional weight of the past few years surged within me. Memories of feeling invisible, undervalued, and unheard intertwined with flashes of anger, disappointment, and betrayal. I remembered the way Thora's gentle voice had masked a subtle pressure, how Joran's laziness was disguised as entitlement, and how Lel's authoritative demeanor had intimidated me into compliance. But with each recollection came clarity. I understood that their behavior was predictable, almost formulaic, and that my long-standing attention to detail, patience, and careful observation had equipped me with the tools to counter their manipulation. By mid-morning, I had drafted a preliminary plan, a step-by-step approach to reclaim my autonomy and ensure that the truth could not be ignored. It was not a plan fueled by revenge or malice. It was a strategy rooted in accountability, evidence, and meticulous preparation. I considered the potential reactions, mapped out possible contingencies, and identified allies who could provide guidance or support if necessary. Every decision I made was calculated, deliberate, and informed by the lessons of years spent navigating a web of subtle coercion. By noon, I took a brief walk to clear my mind, the sunlight illuminating the city streets, reflecting off the windows of towering buildings, and casting long shadows across the pavement. The ordinary scenes of life, the joggers, the cyclists, the shopkeepers arranging their displays, reminded me that the world continued to move forward, indifferent to my struggles, yet full of opportunities for action. I realized that the choice before me was not just about reclaiming what had been taken, but about asserting my right to define my life on my own terms. As I returned to my apartment, the rhythm of my heartbeat mirrored the cadence of determination that had begun to dominate my thoughts. I sat once again at my desk, reviewing every piece of evidence, reorganizing my notes, and crafting a narrative that was both coherent and compelling. The process was exhaustive, demanding focus, precision, and an unwavering commitment to truth. And yet, as I progressed, a sense of empowerment replaced the lingering anxiety that had haunted me for years. I was no longer a passive participant in their schemes. I was an active agent in my own liberation. Every document, every transaction, every recorded conversation became a testament to my resilience and intelligence, a tangible representation of my ability to navigate, understand, and ultimately confront a system designed to diminish me. By evening, the plan had taken shape, structured, detailed, and ready for execution. I reviewed it multiple times, anticipating every possible objection, every defensive maneuver, and every potential attempt to undermine my position. The clarity of thought that emerged from this meticulous preparation was intoxicating. For the first time in years, I felt a profound sense of control, a feeling that I could navigate the complexity of my life with precision, confidence, and purpose. And as night fell, the city lights shimmering like distant constellations outside my window, I understood that this was more than a plan. It was a declaration, a statement of identity, autonomy, and unwavering resolve. The quiet determination that had taken root in my mind now extended to my very being, filling every corner of my consciousness with clarity, focus, and an unshakable commitment to reclaiming my life. I knew that the days ahead would test my patience, challenge my resolve, and demand my full attention. But armed with evidence, insight, and the lessons of years spent observing, enduring, and understanding, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And in that readiness, I discovered a sense of freedom, the kind that comes not from immediate action or confrontation, but from the knowledge that one has prepared, planned, and positioned oneself to reclaim not only what was taken but the very right to exist fully, authentically, and without compromise. The following day began with an almost ritualistic sense of preparation. I woke up early, even before the city's noises fully stirred, feeling the weight of anticipation pressing against my chest. The air was crisp, tinged with the faint smell of dew and the distant aroma of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. I brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat by the window, gazing at the slowly brightening skyline, allowing the quiet of the morning to settle over me like a calm before the storm. The earlier clarity from my planning session had solidified into a sense of purpose so sharp it was almost tangible. I thought of the long nights spent meticulously cataloging every instance of manipulation, the painstaking cross-referencing of bank statements, messages, and conversations. Each piece of evidence felt like a small victory, a tiny flame of empowerment in the shadow of years of control. I felt an unusual mix of anxiety and exhilaration. The anxiety came from the uncertainty of the next steps, and the exhilaration stemmed from the realization that, finally, I held the power to confront the situation with precision rather than emotion. I reviewed my notes again, checking each entry for accuracy, ensuring that every timeline was logical and every document verifiable. The depth of preparation was immense, but necessary. I could not afford to leave room for doubt, error, or misinterpretation. Every action had to be deliberate, and every word carefully chosen. Around mid-morning, I decided to test the waters, contacting a trusted ally who had quietly observed the dynamics for years. Their role was not to intervene but to provide perspective, to validate my observations, and to offer guidance when necessary. As we discussed the situation over a brief phone call, I realized how much I had internalized the patterns of manipulation, almost instinctively knowing what would trigger defensiveness or deflection. The conversation reaffirmed my strategy, adding subtle refinements and highlighting points I had previously underestimated. By early afternoon, I began preparing the materials I would need for a formal confrontation. I organized them into separate folders: evidence of financial exploitation, documented patterns of manipulation, and a detailed narrative connecting each piece of data. The act of physically arranging these files gave me a strange sense of control, transforming abstract frustration into tangible preparedness. Every folder, every sheet, every highlighted passage symbolized the careful effort, patience, and resilience I had cultivated over years of subtle coercion. I realized that the confrontation would not be about emotional outbursts or moral accusations. It would be a demonstration of fact, precision, and undeniable truth. By evening, I sat down at my desk, lamp casting a warm glow over the neatly arranged files, and allowed myself a moment of reflection. The journey to this point had been arduous, filled with emotional turmoil, sleepless nights, and a constant battle against doubt and fear. But now, as I looked at the organized evidence, the clarity of purpose transformed my lingering anxiety into steadfast determination. I knew that the upcoming confrontation would be challenging, requiring composure, resilience, and unwavering focus. Yet, within me, there was a growing confidence, a sense that I had finally stepped into my own power. The night grew deeper, the city outside gradually falling into quiet slumber, while inside, I continued to review and rehearse, anticipating every possible scenario, every defensive tactic, every attempt to undermine my position. With each iteration, my confidence strengthened, and the previously overwhelming task became a structured challenge, a test of intellect, strategy, and endurance. By midnight, I finally allowed myself to rest, the files neatly stacked beside my bed, ready for the day ahead. Sleep came heavy but satisfying, filled with dreams of resolution, empowerment, and the reclamation of my autonomy. For the first time in years, I awoke not with the weight of manipulation pressing down, but with a sense of readiness, clarity, and purpose. I knew the path ahead would be intricate, emotionally taxing, and demanding, but for the first time, I felt the exhilaration of agency, the satisfaction of meticulous preparation, and the quiet but unshakable resolve that I was finally taking control of my life. The dawn of the next day would mark not just an action, but a declaration of truth, autonomy, and the enduring strength of a person who had endured, observed, and prepared for the moment when justice, clarity, and self-respect could finally prevail. The morning light filtered through the curtains in soft streaks, casting a delicate glow across the room. I awoke with a sense of anticipation, an almost electric tension running through my body, as if every fiber of my being was attuned to the day's impending events. The air carried the faint scent of rain from the previous night, a refreshing reminder that the world outside continued in its natural rhythm, oblivious to the carefully orchestrated plan I had constructed. I took a deep breath, feeling the coolness of the morning air filling my lungs, and sipped my coffee slowly, allowing the warmth to steady my nerves. The ritualistic nature of my morning routine, preparing documents, checking timelines, reviewing notes, was no longer mundane. It had become a form of meditation, a way to center myself and align my focus on the steps I needed to take. I thought about the years of patient endurance, of calculated observation, and of meticulous recording. Each moment of silent frustration, each forced compromise, each understated act of submission had contributed to a reservoir of insight and preparation that I was now ready to tap into fully. As I reviewed the folder containing evidence of financial discrepancies, my heart raced slightly, not out of fear, but out of the thrill of empowerment. Each document, each email, each recorded conversation was a tangible manifestation of the truth that had long been buried beneath layers of deception and manipulation. I imagined the moment when these pieces would converge, forming an undeniable narrative that would leave no room for denial or distortion. The anticipation was intoxicating. By mid-morning, I prepared my workspace for what I knew would be a long and precise session of confrontation and negotiation. I arranged every folder meticulously, ensuring that nothing was overlooked, and rehearsed the sequence in which I would present each point. The physical act of organizing the materials provided a grounding sense of control, transforming abstract plans into concrete steps. I thought about possible responses, imagined the defenses they might erect, and preemptively planned strategies to maintain composure and clarity in the face of potential distraction or deflection. Every detail was accounted for. Every angle was considered. Around noon, I took a brief walk outside, letting the bustling energy of the city streets infuse me with a renewed sense of perspective. Observing the rhythm of life, the people laughing, the cyclists weaving through traffic, the shopkeepers attending to their businesses, reminded me that the world did not pause for my challenges, yet it provided an opportunity for action, for assertion, and for reclamation of agency. As I returned to my apartment, the sun casting long shadows across the floor, I felt a sense of quiet determination settling over me, a calm readiness for the events to come. The next few hours would demand focus, intellect, and emotional fortitude, and I was prepared to meet them head-on. The evening approached, and I meticulously reviewed my plan once more, confirming every detail, verifying every document, and rehearsing every statement in my mind. The act of repetition, far from being tedious, reinforced my confidence and mental preparedness. I knew that the upcoming confrontation would test my patience, strategic thinking, and emotional resilience. But I was ready. I was no longer a passive participant in a cycle of manipulation. I had become an active architect of truth and accountability. Night fell slowly, draping the city in a blanket of quiet introspection, punctuated only by the distant sounds of traffic and occasional footsteps on the pavement below. I sat at my desk, lamp casting a golden hue over my organized files, feeling a profound sense of control and readiness. The journey to this point had been long and arduous, filled with emotional turmoil, strategic observation, and countless nights of reflection. Yet now, armed with preparation, knowledge, and a detailed plan, I felt an unshakable certainty that I could navigate the challenges ahead with precision and resilience. The day's anticipation had transformed into a steady pulse of readiness, a rhythm that coursed through my veins, aligning my thoughts, actions, and emotions in perfect synchronization. I understood, with absolute clarity, that the confrontation would not merely be about exposing wrongdoing, it would be about reclaiming autonomy, asserting boundaries, and demonstrating the profound strength that comes from preparation, patience, and insight. As I finally allowed myself a moment to breathe, a calm satisfaction settled over me. The city outside continued its unceasing rhythm, indifferent yet full of possibilities. And within that quiet, I recognized the truth that the power I had cultivated over years of careful observation, documentation, and planning was now mine to wield. I was ready, not for chaos, not for conflict, but for a precise, deliberate, and undeniable assertion of truth and self-determination. And in that readiness, I felt a liberation deeper than any moment I had experienced in years, a liberation born not from action alone, but from the mastery of preparation, strategy, and unwavering resolve. The morning air was heavy with expectation, almost as if the city itself was aware of the storm of determination brewing inside me. I woke with the familiar pulse of adrenaline coursing through my veins, a rhythm that mingled seamlessly with the calm certainty I had cultivated over weeks of preparation. As I stretched and moved about my small apartment, the sunlight pouring through the windows painted the walls with golden streaks, illuminating the stacks of carefully organized folders and documents that had become my silent allies. I made my coffee, the aroma comforting, grounding me in the routine while my mind raced through every possible scenario that might unfold during the day. I reviewed the plan one last time, mentally rehearsing every statement, anticipating every counterargument, and envisioning each reaction with the precision of a strategist who had spent countless nights studying the battlefield. I reminded myself that this confrontation was not merely a clash of wills, it was the culmination of years of observation, patience, and meticulous documentation. I thought of every subtle act of manipulation I had endured, every disguised threat, every whispered lie, and every calculated omission. Each memory, once a source of frustration and pain, had now become a stepping stone, a piece of the puzzle that formed the foundation of my readiness. By mid-morning, I had set up my workspace with meticulous care. The folders were arranged in a sequence that mirrored the narrative I had constructed: evidence of deception, patterns of control, financial discrepancies, and finally, a carefully documented chronology of emotional manipulation. The physical act of organizing these materials provided a strange sense of empowerment. The papers, highlighted notes, and neatly labeled files were tangible proof of my resilience and determination. As I sat at my desk, reviewing the documents for the 100th time, a profound clarity settled over me. I was no longer overwhelmed by emotion. Every nerve and thought was aligned with purpose. I considered every possible tactic my adversary might use: deflection, denial, aggression, or guilt-tripping. But for each potential tactic, I had a prepared response, a countermeasure rooted not in anger, but in precise observation and irrefutable evidence. The hours passed in a quiet, intense focus, punctuated only by brief pauses for water and the occasional glance out the window at the bustling street below. The city moved on, oblivious to the internal storm of preparation and determination that filled my apartment. And yet, that indifference of the world outside was strangely comforting. It reminded me that life continues regardless, and that the power of deliberate, thoughtful action lies not in chaos, but in control. By early afternoon, I was mentally rehearsing the confrontation one final time. Each word, each pause, each deliberate gesture had been carefully considered and tested in my mind. I imagined the initial tension, the defensive stances, the subtle attempts to undermine my confidence, and how I would respond with unwavering composure. The thought of finally presenting the truth, fully and unambiguously, brought with it a mixture of anticipation and a quiet, deep satisfaction. This was not about revenge. It was about clarity, about the reclamation of autonomy and dignity. As evening approached, the sunlight dimmed into a soft amber glow, reflecting off the polished surfaces of my carefully arranged workspace. I allowed myself a moment to close my eyes, breathing deeply, letting the energy of preparation settle into a steady pulse of confidence. The journey to this point had been long, filled with meticulous observation, sleepless nights, and countless mental rehearsals. And yet, in this moment, every second of effort felt justified, every ounce of patience rewarded. I had transformed frustration into strategy, pain into insight, and endurance into power. The night fell gradually, shrouding the city in quiet anticipation, while inside, I felt a resolute calm. Tomorrow would mark the first step in a decisive confrontation, the culmination of careful planning and unwavering focus. I felt ready, not only to confront the situation with clarity and precision, but to emerge with the knowledge that my strength had been forged through preparation, insight, and perseverance. In the stillness of the night, with the folders stacked neatly beside me, I finally allowed myself a moment of peace. The city slept, the air was still, and I was poised, grounded, and unwavering, ready to take the next step toward resolution, empowerment, and the assertion of my truth. The next morning dawned with a subtle tension. The sunlight diffused through the curtains as if hesitant to enter the room, mirroring the quiet anxiety that hummed beneath my calm exterior. I awoke with a heightened awareness, every sound in the apartment magnified, every shadow seemingly significant. The city outside was slowly stirring to life, the distant hum of traffic, the rhythmic footsteps of commuters, the occasional bark of a dog, but inside, my focus was a razor-sharp stillness. I went through my morning routine mechanically, yet each action was charged with intention. Making coffee, checking the organization of my documents, reviewing the sequences of events I had meticulously planned to present. I could feel the weight of anticipation pressing gently on my shoulders, a reminder that today marked a pivotal turning point in the journey I had undertaken. Sitting at my desk, I ran my fingers over the neatly arranged folders, each one representing a carefully documented piece of a larger narrative. The evidence was undeniable, methodical, and precise. Financial irregularities, messages and emails that contradicted spoken promises, subtle manipulations that had gone unnoticed for far too long. My mind wandered momentarily to the countless nights I had spent observing, recording, and strategizing, nights when sleep was sacrificed in favor of planning, reflection, and the meticulous building of my arsenal of truth. Every memory of past injustice, every sting of betrayal, had been transformed into fuel for this moment of clarity. By mid-morning, I had rehearsed the sequence of presentation countless times, imagining potential reactions and carefully crafting responses that would maintain the balance of composure and assertiveness. I anticipated denials, defensive gestures, and attempts to redirect the conversation, yet for each possibility, I had a prepared course of action. My internal dialogue was methodical, precise, and unrelenting, ensuring that no emotional impulse could compromise the careful strategy one had constructed. Stepping outside briefly, I inhaled the fresh air, feeling the pulse of life around me, the hurried conversations of pedestrians, the bright morning light reflecting off building windows, the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. These mundane details grounded me, reminding me that the world continued its rhythm regardless of personal conflicts, yet also highlighting the power of deliberate, intentional action. Returning to my apartment, I felt a renewed clarity and focus, a sense of empowerment that was both exhilarating and calming. I began to assemble the materials, arranging the documents and evidence in a logical sequence that would guide the confrontation like a carefully choreographed dance. Each step, each transition, was designed to build understanding, dismantle denial, and ultimately reveal the undeniable truth. Afternoon arrived slowly, marked by the shifting angles of sunlight and the quiet hum of the city below. I continued to review my notes, rehearsing every statement, imagining the subtle inflections of my voice, the pauses for effect, the calm precision that would convey confidence and authority. I reflected on the emotional journey that had brought me to this point, the frustration, the moments of doubt, the silent endurance of manipulation, and the gradual accumulation of insight and evidence. Every step had been necessary, every moment of patience had strengthened my resolve, and every observation had contributed to the clarity I now wielded. As evening approached, the apartment was bathed in a warm amber glow, shadows lengthening across the floor. I allowed myself a brief moment of introspection, thinking about the magnitude of what was about to unfold. This confrontation was not about aggression. It was about clarity, justice, and the assertion of agency long denied. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of control that came not from dominance, but from preparation, insight, and the unassailable truth I carried. Night settled over the city gradually, a gentle shroud of quiet anticipation enveloping both the world outside and the careful bubble I had constructed within my apartment. Sitting at my desk, reviewing the final details, I recognized that the culmination of years of careful observation, patient endurance, and meticulous planning was finally within reach. The moment of action, long envisioned and meticulously rehearsed, was approaching, and I was ready. I felt an unshakable certainty in my ability to navigate the confrontation with precision, integrity, and emotional intelligence. The journey had been long and demanding, yet every sacrifice, every moment of vigilance, had been necessary to arrive at this precise point. And in the stillness of the night, with the city quiet beneath me, I felt an overwhelming sense of readiness, a readiness not just to confront the situation, but to emerge from it empowered, clear, and unburdened by the manipulations that had once dominated my life. The night before the confrontation was a strange mixture of anticipation and stillness, a delicate balance between the quiet hum of the city and the storm of preparation raging inside me. Every detail had been considered, every possibility rehearsed, yet the weight of what was to come pressed gently against my consciousness. I found myself pacing the apartment, my footsteps echoing softly against the wooden floors, a rhythm that seemed to match the cadence of my thoughts. I paused by the window, looking out at the city lights flickering in the darkness, each one a small beacon of life continuing on, unaware of the personal storm about to unfold within these walls. I sipped my tea slowly, the warmth spreading through my chest, grounding me even as my mind raced through the final sequences of events. I visualized the confrontation in painstaking detail, the expressions, the pauses, the subtle body language that would accompany every word. I imagined the reactions, the deflections, the emotional undercurrents, and how I would navigate each with a calm precision that had been honed through months of preparation. Sitting at my desk, I arranged the folders and notes one final time, reviewing each document for clarity, accuracy, and impact. The evidence was irrefutable, a meticulously curated narrative of manipulation, deception, and hidden truths, presented in a sequence designed to guide understanding, provoke reflection, and ultimately reveal the undeniable reality. The sheer weight of this preparation, the countless hours of observation, note-taking, and mental rehearsal gave me a profound sense of empowerment. It was as though each documented detail, each highlighted passage, was a brick in the foundation of my resolve, building a fortress of clarity and control around me. As midnight approached, I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection. I thought about the long journey that had brought me here, the moments of doubt, the quiet endurance of manipulation, the nights spent planning and strategizing. Each moment had been essential, each challenge had shaped my understanding, and every act of patience had strengthened the resolve that now coursed through me. I recognized that this confrontation was not about vengeance, but about asserting agency, reclaiming autonomy, and ensuring that truth was recognized without distortion or denial. The city outside seemed to pause. The usual sounds of traffic and distant conversation softened into a hushed backdrop, as if acknowledging the weight of the night. I felt a profound connection to the stillness, a sense that the universe itself had conspired to grant me this moment of clarity. I reviewed my own emotional state, ensuring that composure would not falter, that confidence would remain unshaken, and that every word spoken would carry the deliberate weight of intention. I practiced the tone, the inflection, the pauses for emphasis, imagining the subtle but powerful effect of each carefully chosen phrase. The apartment, quiet and orderly, felt like both a sanctuary and a stage, a controlled environment where preparation met opportunity. By the early hours of the morning, exhaustion mingled with a heightened awareness, a paradoxical state of alert relaxation. I could feel the tension coiling and uncoiling inside me, a constant reminder of the responsibility I bore to the truth and to myself. The night stretched on, and I remained at my desk, surrounded by the organized chaos of documents, notes, and evidence, each element a testament to the journey I had endured. I allowed my mind to wander briefly, reflecting on the person I had become through this process, resilient, perceptive, and unwavering in the pursuit of clarity. And yet, despite the meticulous planning, there was an undercurrent of unpredictability, a recognition that human emotion and reaction could never be fully controlled. This awareness did not deter me. Rather, it sharpened my focus, emphasizing the importance of adaptability, patience, and calm authority. As dawn approached, the first light crept slowly into the room, casting long, soft shadows across the floor. I felt a quiet resolve settle over me, a deep understanding that the coming day would test not only my preparation but my ability to remain composed, empathetic, and precise. The confrontation awaited, inevitable and necessary, and I was ready. I rose from my chair, stretched, and took a deep breath, the air crisp and cool against my lungs, a reminder of the vitality and clarity that preparation had granted me. The city was waking now, the sounds of life gradually rising in volume, yet inside, I remained centered, focused, and ready. The stage was set, the evidence organized, and my mind aligned with purpose. The moment of reckoning was near, and I felt an unshakable certainty in my ability to navigate it with precision, dignity, and unwavering resolve. And in that quiet dawn, I knew that whatever unfolded, I had arrived at this moment through intentional action, deliberate preparation, and the enduring strength of patience and insight. By the time I finally stepped out into the morning light, the city was alive with motion and sound, the rhythm of life continuing unabated, oblivious to the personal storm about to unfold. Each step I took toward the meeting place was deliberate, measured, and intentional, a reflection of the months of careful preparation, observation, and strategizing that had led me to this exact moment. The air was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of freshly baked bread, distant exhaust fumes, and the faint tang of rain that had left the streets shimmering overnight. I noticed the small details that many overlook, the way sunlight reflected off the glass windows of passing cars, the subtle flicker of shadows cast by swaying tree branches, the faint murmurs of people deep in conversation as they went about their routines. Each observation reinforced my focus, grounding me in the present while keeping my mind aligned with the sequence of actions I had planned. As I approached the location, my heart maintained a steady rhythm, not in fear, but in anticipation, the subtle hum of readiness resonating through my chest. I reviewed in my mind the flow of evidence I would present, the order of documents and screenshots, the carefully timed revelations that would dismantle every attempt at denial or deflection. My confidence had been forged through meticulous preparation, and yet, I remained acutely aware of the emotional undercurrents that could shift the balance in unexpected ways. I allowed myself a moment of reflection, thinking back on the countless nights spent observing, documenting, and strategizing, the silent endurance of manipulation, and the gradual accumulation of clarity and insight. Every moment of patience had strengthened my resolve, and every small victory, though unseen by others, had prepared me for this encounter. Entering the building, I moved with quiet purpose, my footsteps soft but deliberate on the polished floors, my mind scanning every detail of the environment, from the arrangement of furniture to the positioning of potential witnesses. I imagined the scene unfolding as I had envisioned, yet I remained flexible, knowing that true mastery required adaptability. I took a deep breath, feeling the calm focus of preparation settling over me, and reminded myself that this confrontation was not about aggression, but about asserting truth, clarity, and self-respect. The room where the meeting would take place was neutral, quiet, and formal, a canvas on which I would lay the meticulously organized evidence, guiding the conversation with precision and clarity. Sitting across from the other party, I noticed the subtle expressions, the fleeting microreactions, the small gestures that betrayed hidden emotions. I allowed the silence to stretch momentarily, creating space for the tension to build, and then began with calm authority, presenting the first piece of evidence in a logical, compelling manner. Each statement was deliberate, each revelation carefully framed to convey clarity without provocation, yet with undeniable impact. I observed every reaction closely, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the flicker of hesitation in the eyes, the brief tightening of the jaw. With every carefully chosen word, I guided the conversation, anticipating responses, preparing for attempts at diversion, and redirecting smoothly without anger or frustration. The hours passed in this careful dance of communication, a balance of patience, authority, and empathy, with each new piece of evidence dismantling the constructed narrative of deception that had dominated my life. At times, the tension was palpable, a heavy weight in the room, yet I remained composed, drawing on the months of preparation and inner reflection that had honed my emotional intelligence and strategic awareness. By the late afternoon, the culmination of the confrontation was clear. The undeniable truth had been revealed, and with it, a shift in dynamics that was both liberating and profoundly satisfying. I could feel the release of tension within myself, the empowerment that comes from deliberate, careful action, and the quiet satisfaction of having navigated the situation with precision, dignity, and unwavering focus. Leaving the building, I felt lighter, unburdened by the manipulation that had previously held sway, carrying instead the quiet strength of someone who had faced challenges with preparation, insight, and emotional clarity. The city seemed different now, not in its physical form, but in my perception of it. Each sound, each movement, each interaction felt layered with a newfound sense of agency and presence, a recognition that the careful, deliberate cultivation of patience, observation, and strategic action had brought me to this point of empowerment. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection, acknowledging both the journey and the growth it had demanded. Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every careful observation had been necessary, and in the unfolding clarity of truth, I found not just resolution but a deeper understanding of my own resilience and capacity for intentional action. The experience left an indelible mark, a combination of relief, empowerment, and wisdom that would guide every future encounter, decision, and interaction. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I recognized the profound truth that preparation, insight, and unwavering focus are the foundations of lasting strength, the tools that transform challenges into opportunities for clarity, growth, and self-empowerment. The days that followed the confrontation were a curious blend of relief, reflection, and the quiet rebuilding of life in the aftermath of truth. I woke each morning with a sense of purpose that had previously been clouded by uncertainty, manipulation, and the constant calculation of hidden agendas. The city outside my window continued its relentless rhythm, cars honking, people bustling, vendors calling out from the street corners, but within me, a calm clarity had settled, like the surface of a lake after a storm. Each day, I reviewed the events in my mind, not with obsessive dwelling, but with careful reflection, considering how each action, each choice, had led to this newfound equilibrium. I began to understand the deeper lessons embedded within the experience. Patience was not passive, preparation was not merely logistical, and emotional resilience was the anchor that allowed one to navigate even the most turbulent encounters with composure. I noticed subtle changes in how I perceive interactions, both casual and consequential. Conversations that once would have seemed threatening or manipulative now appeared in clear, objective terms, their underlying motives more transparent. I found myself observing with empathy, recognizing patterns without allowing them to dictate my emotions, a skill cultivated through months of disciplined preparation and acute awareness. Social interactions regained a sense of balance. I was no longer caught in the web of reactionary responses or instinctive defensiveness. Instead, I approached situations with a quiet authority, understanding that the strength derived from preparation, observation, and thoughtful engagement far outweighed any impulsive or reactive behavior. At work, at home, and in the rare moments of leisure, I noticed a renewed focus and intentionality. Decisions were no longer rushed or clouded by anxiety. Each choice was deliberate, weighed against both immediate impact and long-term consequence. This intentional living extended to self-care and personal growth. I allowed myself moments of stillness, meditation, and reflection, recognizing that mental and emotional restoration were integral to sustaining the clarity and empowerment I had painstakingly cultivated. Relationships that had been strained under the weight of deception now experienced a subtle but profound shift. Trust, once fragile, began to rebuild not through external validation, but through the authenticity and consistency of my own actions. I noticed how others responded to this shift. Interactions were smoother, conversations more genuine, and mutual respect strengthened. Even moments of conflict were approached with calm problem-solving rather than reactive emotion, a testament to the depth of transformation I had undergone. Beyond personal interactions, I also became more attuned to the broader patterns of human behavior. I could sense duplicity, hesitation, or strategic maneuvering without being drawn into unnecessary confrontation, navigating each situation with both discernment and compassion. The empowerment was not about control over others, but about mastery over self, a principle I had come to understand deeply. With each passing week, the sense of liberation grew. I revisited old memories with perspective, recognizing the resilience and ingenuity I had displayed in navigating manipulation and uncovering truth. The weight of past injustices no longer dictated my emotional state. Instead, they served as reminders of growth, wisdom, and the capability to endure and overcome. I began to document my reflections, writing down insights, lessons, and strategies that had guided me, creating a personal manual for navigating complexity, deception, and emotional turbulence. This process was both cathartic and instructive, reinforcing the knowledge that intentional preparation and measured action were the most reliable tools for maintaining clarity and achieving resolution. Even in moments of solitude, I felt a profound sense of alignment with my values, intentions, and the trajectory of my life. The experience had instilled a quiet confidence, an understanding that challenges, no matter how intricate or emotionally charged, could be approached with calm authority, preparation, and ethical clarity. As weeks turned into months, the transformation became evident not only internally, but externally in the way I moved through the world, interacted with others, and approached both opportunities and challenges. There was a fluidity to my actions, a groundedness in my decisions, and a strength in my presence that commanded respect without demanding it. The confrontation, once a source of tension and anxiety, had become a defining moment, a catalyst for personal growth, empowerment, and clarity of purpose. I understood now that true power was not in reaction, retaliation, or aggression, but in patience, preparation, and the unwavering commitment to truth and integrity. And in this quiet, ongoing journey of self-mastery, I realized that the lessons learned were not confined to a single encounter. They were the foundation for a lifetime of resilience, insight, and deliberate action, guiding every step with precision, empathy, and unshakable clarity. As the sun began to set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep orange, crimson, and violet, I felt a profound sense of closure settle within me, a calm that was both unfamiliar and incredibly liberating. The journey that had begun in shadows, uncertainty, and manipulation was now reaching its natural conclusion, not with anger or revenge, but with clarity, empowerment, and acceptance. Each step I took on the quiet streets felt deliberate, reflective, and full of newfound strength. The city, once a backdrop to tension and hidden agendas, now seemed alive with opportunity, possibility, and the promise of a life guided by intention rather than circumstance. I paused for a moment on a bridge overlooking the river, watching the water reflect the fiery hues of the sky, rippling gently with each gust of wind, carrying with it a sense of continuity, resilience, and renewal. It struck me how much I had grown, not just in intellect or strategy, but in emotional resilience, empathy, and self-awareness. The lessons learned were etched deeply into my being. Patience was a weapon stronger than impulsive action, observation sharper than words, and preparation more powerful than instinct alone. I allowed myself to reflect on the months of struggle, the sleepless nights spent analyzing, strategizing, and enduring emotional turbulence. Every tear, every moment of doubt, every sleepless night had been a stepping stone toward this profound moment of empowerment. The confrontation, which once loomed large in my mind as an insurmountable challenge, had been transformed into a testament of careful planning, insight, and measured courage. The people who had once attempted to manipulate, deceive, or control me were no longer central to my emotional state. Their influence had diminished, not through confrontation alone, but through my deliberate commitment to clarity, truth, and integrity. I realized that true resolution does not come from forcing change in others, but from cultivating strength, patience, and wisdom within oneself. Even the lingering traces of doubt that had followed me for so long had begun to dissipate, replaced by a serene awareness that life was a series of challenges meant to be met with composure, insight, and unwavering self-respect. As I walked back through the streets, observing the laughter of children, the calm conversations of passers-by, and the subtle rhythms of daily life, I felt deeply connected to the world around me, yet also distinct in my empowerment, carrying an inner sense of mastery and freedom. I reflected on how preparation, observation, and emotional discipline had shaped not just the outcome of the confrontation, but the very way I engaged with life itself. Every interaction now carried meaning, intentionality, and balance, free from manipulation or hidden motives. I understood that the confrontation was not the end of a story, but rather a turning point, a moment that allowed me to recognize the strength, intelligence, and resilience that had always existed within me, now fully realized. Returning home, I paused to look at my reflection in the mirror, not just seeing the person I had become, but feeling the depth of growth, clarity, and empowerment that radiated from within. It was a quiet triumph, uncelebrated by the world, yet profoundly transformative. I allowed myself a small smile, acknowledging the journey, the challenges overcome, and the wisdom earned. That night, as I sat by the window watching the city lights twinkle like distant stars, I wrote down the final reflections of the experience, lessons on patience, resilience, clarity, and the importance of intentional action. Each word was infused with the authenticity and insight that only comes from lived experience, a personal testament to the power of preparation, strategic thinking, and emotional intelligence. I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the manipulation or deceit endured, but for the strength, awareness, and wisdom they had cultivated within me. The journey had revealed not just the truth of external circumstances, but the enduring power, resilience, and capability that resided within my own heart and mind. And as the night deepened and the world outside became hushed, I realized that this chapter of life had reached its natural conclusion, not with bitterness, anger, or regret, but with empowerment, understanding, and a profound sense of peace. The past, with all its challenges and betrayals, no longer held sway over me. It had served its purpose in shaping a version of myself that was stronger, wiser, and fully aligned with my values and intentions. I closed my journal, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders, and allowed myself to breathe deeply, savoring the quiet triumph and the clarity of purpose that now defined my life. Tomorrow, and every day thereafter, would be guided by insight, preparation, and the unwavering understanding that true power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. With a final glance at the shimmering cityscape and the river reflecting the fading light of day, I smiled once more, fully aware that the journey was not over, but had transformed into something far more meaningful, a life lived with clarity, strength, and an unshakable sense of self.